we have any Talking Heads fans in the audience?
Yeah, man.
Okay, got a talk I'd like to play for you. You may find yourself living in a shotgun shack. And you may find yourself in another part of the world. You may find yourself behind the wheel of a large automobile. You may find yourself with a beautiful house and a beautiful wife. You may ask yourself, how did I get here? My name is Kelly Sutton. The title of this talk is Same as It Ever Was, an oral history of modern web development. This talk is going to go into the history of JavaScript and computing as a whole. And I really want to touch on something that I see at work and just online, which is this sentiment that things are changing very quickly, hard to keep up. I just learned Flow, now you're trying to make me learn TypeScript. So hopefully you come away with this talk with a renewed sense of optimism and maybe a little bit of direction as to where we're going. We're also going to dive into a little bit of pop music history while we're at it. So my name is Kelly Sutton, like Florida and Jasmine said. I'm an engineering manager in San Francisco. I live there with my fiance and our dog, Greta. I write mostly Ruby and quite a bit of JavaScript. I work for a company called Gusto. Gusto is payroll, benefits, and HR for small businesses in the United States. Can I try a show of hands and see how many folks are getting paid by Gusto right now? Okay, a few. Gusto currently does payroll for about 1% of small businesses in the United States, which is about 0.1% of the US GDP. So that's a pretty cool way to measure impact in basis points of US GDP. And we transact about $1 billion a month. And JavaScript is a huge part of what we do. We have a very rich client-side application. This is one of the things that we are known for, is our pleasant customer experience. We do this using React and a suite of other tools. And there's a lot of incidental complexity built into a payroll system. We have to have individual React components for every single state, sometimes specific cities. So there's only so small that you can make a payroll system and still have it follow the letter of the law. And so this talk was really born out of a single question from a relatively new employee at Gusto. He was on day 2, getting his development environment set up. And he came to me and he said, Kelly, I have a question. What is Webpack and why do we use it? And I said, oh, well, Webpack is really simple. It's just an asset bundler, and the reason why we asset bundles is, oh god, this rabbit hole goes very deep. So let's go down this rabbit hole. But first, real quick overview of Webpack. What is Webpack? It's an asset bundler. It's one of many things that kind of does this type of job. It takes all of your different JavaScript files, CSS files, images, or any variants of any of those, kind of smooshes them all together and puts them into a few packages or bundles. And we do this for performance. Web browsers like it when you send them fewer files for the most part. So we try to send our customers fewer, larger files instead of many smaller files. So I kind of define Webpack as one of these tools that's kind of interesting. It's a tool that makes the developer experience better while providing no harm to the customer experience. It is possible to reap the same benefits of Webpack, but you'd be working out of a single large, huge JS file, and you'd probably hate your teammates. But Webpack is definitely not without its flaws. This is a pretty common sentiment. You can spend weeks on that Webpack config.js, and all that time that you're spending is not really adding value to your product. It's not. Yes, you might be able to eventually ship something to your customers, but every hour that you spend on Webpack or your Webpack config is not an hour that you've spent making your product necessarily better. So how did we get here? To understand that, we need to go back to 1972. In 1972, computers looked like this. This is the System 360 at NASA, Model 91. This picture was taken sometime in the 1960s. One can assume they used it to compute flight data and occasionally run payroll. And if you dig into the OS 360 manual, you'll see this thing called a Linkage Editor mentioned quite a few times. So this is a piece of brand new technology. It allows you to write in multiple different languages, like the hottest languages, like COBOL, Fortran, Assembler. And it'll take those and compile them into, or the compilers need to turn them into some common format, but then this linker or linkage editor lets you smush them all together into a single bundle, load module. And this was a pretty remarkable technology at the time. So I think it's fitting that the #1 hit single of the year was Roberta Flack's First Time Ever I Saw Your Face. Let's fast forward to 1991. If you were a Unix developer in 1991, it sucked. In the early 90s, there were many, many different versions of Unix, all different companies trying to commercialize them. So like HP, IBM, what else do we got here? Sun, Solaris. And in 1990, the last mover of a Unix-like environment had not even been invented yet. In 1991, Linus Torvalds published the first version of Linux. And at the time, if you were to tell someone, hey, this is going to run half the software on the planet, you'd be like, there's no way that NPM module that was released last week is going to do that. This thing felt very, very new. And there's no shortage of choice for developers at the time. Do you specialize in HP UX, IRIX, NetBSD? I don't know. Most of these don't exist anymore. I do know that. But out of this, the open source software movement was born. I think it introduced this idea of giving back to the community, so I think that's fitting because the #1 hit single was Everything I Do It For You by Bryan Adams. It's a pretty bad song, actually. Fast forward to 1995. This is where JavaScript starts to come into play. In 1995, in May, as legend has it, this guy, Brendan Eich, while working at Netscape, created the language of JavaScript in 10 days, and it later shipped that year with Netscape Navigator 2.0. 10 days is not a lot of time to develop a programming language. This is like it's like if a hackathon project spawned an entire industry, right? When he was like on day 9, he probably wasn't thinking, you know what, in 2018 there's going to be an auditorium full of people in New York City talking about this for 2 days. And the things that we love and the things that we hate kind of all trace back to those 10 days. We're still dealing with a lot of the rough edges of JavaScript at the time. But I think it's pretty remarkable that just 10 days of effort can lead to something so substantial. And in some ways, JavaScript outlived the company that created it, which is also pretty cool. You could call it cool, or you could also call it gangster. Which is fitting because the #1 single of the year, 1995, was Coolio, Gangster Paradise. Then nothing happened for 9 years. No, but JavaScript was mostly forgotten. The internet and the web, they were trying to just answer this question of, is this thing financially viable? Can we build businesses on top of this thing? We thought very much yes for a short amount of time, and then we thought very much no. And JavaScript was kind of just this thing that you use to change like colors of buttons when hovering over them, right? It wasn't really taken that seriously. There are plenty of other options like Java Applets, ActiveX, Flash, right? Like if you wanted an interactive experience during this time, chances are you were writing Flash. So let's fast forward to 2004. So 2004 was actually the first year where this really cool thing called XML HTTP request was available in basically all of the browsers. XML HTTP request, or XHR, kind of blew the doors wide open on what was possible on the web again. You could send information or receive information from the server without reloading the page. Whoa, amazing. This is not that old. And this technology is what allowed Ajax to happen. It started this like Web 2.0 movement. Websites look like this. It was so cool at the time. So cool. And so in 2004, there was this renewed sense of optimism. You've got XHR. Folks are excited again. Web 2.0 is here. We're kind of recovering from the hangover from the .com crash. So everyone was kind of feeling like, yeah. Let's fast forward to 2006. So we've got XHR. Everything is possible again on the web. But all the browsers kind of had different APIs, and it was hard to write code that was portable in all of the different browsers. They all had like slightly different ways of doing things. So you saw a plethora of tools come up. These are like your MooTools, your Scriptaculous, your YUI, your jQuery, your Prototype. All of these were kind of coming around at the same time, and they all had more or less the same promise, right? Less JavaScript and have it work in more places. But at the time, it was very difficult to say which one should I use. It felt like a new one was coming out every month. Code looked like this. Everyone used the $sign. I don't know why. We just added stuff to the $sign, and that was kind of like a new standard library in JavaScript. But it still kind of sucked. You could say JavaScript developers were having a bad day. Fast forward to 2011. We've been writing these like balls of mud for a little bit, using all of these different libraries. And so around 2010, 2011, we start to see full-blown frameworks show up. So these are things like Angular, Backbone, Ember, and React. Small note on the React here, this is the date that it was released internally in Facebook. The rest of the world didn't get to use it until 2013. And these frameworks took a strong opinion on how you should structure your application, what the different pieces and components should be. you should have a view layer, you should have a router, you should have a model layer. Every one of these was a little bit different. And it really allowed us to take code that would look like this and turn it into this. It was a very different way of thinking how a web page should behave. But we all kind of know how this story ends. It doesn't just stop with app.js. And before too long, we just had so many script tags in our HTML, it became very difficult to deal with. But nonetheless, these web frameworks continued to move things along in 2010 and 2011, and still to this day. Things were getting pretty serious with web development. You could say we were rolling in the deep. Brings us to 2012. So at this point, the HTML files with all the script tags were kind of getting out of control. So a bunch of tools came up to kind of solve this problem or solve problems related to it. A lot of these asset bundlers or build pipelines. So you see tools like Grunt, Gulp, Broccoli, Webpack. Things like Parcel and Rollup would be introduced several years later here. And they all had kind of a similar idea. You should be able, as a developer, to write in a lot of small files and keep all of your assets all over the place. And then the tool will take care of making that a great customer experience. Just smooshing them into one bundle and then sending it to the browser. But this feels pretty familiar if we think back to 1972. You could almost say that this feels like somebody I used to know. I heard an audible sigh. This is what you get. So what is Webpack, and why do we use it? Why do we use any of these technologies? They're all very different. There always seem to be a lot of them. But that fast change is a feature and not necessarily a bug. It is part of the industry today, and it kind of always has been. You'd be hard-pressed to find someone developing software for an Iris or a Solaris system today. You'd be hard-pressed to find someone starting a project with prototype. So there are these like last movers in each of these situations. But at the same time, even the things that win, jQuery, are something that a lot of people in this audience are probably in the process of removing from their applications. So things are born, some die early, others die later, but they all definitely die. So the question here is, what can we learn from all of this? And I think it's really this, which is we need to be mindful of history. We need to make sure that we're not relearning the same lessons from our parents or our grandparents. We need to talk to them and ask them, like, hey, there's kind of this problem of I'm trying to get all these small things and smush them into one big thing. If your grandparent worked in the industry, they might say, like, that sounds a lot like a linker, right? Or something like that. So we need to be mindful of the things that we're working on today might not necessarily survive. We shouldn't get at each other's throats saying, like, Ruby, no Python, and then it turns out JavaScript is actually the language that is more popular than both of them combined these days. It's pretty cool. Even JavaScript might die one day. So I think over time, we realized that, you know what, it's the same as it ever was. Same as it ever was. Same as it ever was. Thanks.